3 decades after a much younger and less secure lesbian and gay movement soundly defeated California's anti-gay Briggs Amendment in far more difficult circumstances, you would have thought we'd learned something by now. The contrast between the movement in the streets of the late 1970s and today's Madison Avenue media campaigns couldn't be more stark. The movement 3 decades ago also targeted and successfully labeled its leading opponents as narrow-minded bigots, driving a wedge between them and many voters. It drove home the message that no matter how much Anita Bryant, who we were reading about the other day, her role in the opposition to the gay rights movement in Miami. She was a singer too, wasn't she? No matter how much Anita Bryant tried to dress up their beliefs in religion, the fact that they opposed equal rights for a whole group of people made them bigots. So the argument went. Pro-gay rallies and marches were held in towns big and small, generating free media and emboldening the rank and file on our side to more aggressively spread our message. Contrast this to Maine, where the Portland Archdiocese put up 1/5 of the cash for the anti-gay side. Yet most pro-gay forces refused to call out church leaders for their support of bigotry, let alone blatant violation of their nonprofit status. Pro-gay marches and rallies, from what we could see, they didn't happen, except in distant Washington, D.C. The latest March on Washington from a couple weeks ago. Several Super Bowls ago, a small firm that made rubber liners for pickup truck beds sank its entire ad budget into one short, very effective ad during halftime. The firm rocketed to #1 in market share on the basis of that one ad. Despite a tiny budget, effective messaging cut through and trumped the advertising clutter of everyone else. This year, pro-gay forces far outspent the anti-gay forces in media buys, but replayed the same ineffective messaging used in the dozens of previously failed campaigns. Gays are people too. Please support our rights. And messaging from the anti-forces, the anti-gay forces, they didn't pull their punches. Gays hurt kids. Defend your kids from them. The same effective Save Our Children theme that Anita Bryant used a generation ago. Effective messaging trumped volume. It didn't have to be. We too can have effective messaging if we're willing to take the gloves off. One of the most important legacies of the African American civil rights movement was that it delegitimized forthright bigots in the eyes of many Americans. While certainly a large number of Americans still hold racist and other bigoted views, in many quarters far outside liberal salons, the open adherence to racist views is frowned upon. Even sections of the far right try to insulate themselves from criticism by pretending how diverse they are. They've seen the career trajectories of Anita Bryant, David Duke, and Dr. Laura, and know that if they are successfully labeled as bigots, they will have much more difficulty getting or retaining a mass audience. A generation ago, we were able to rapidly dethrone Anita Bryant and roll back her Save Our Children campaign through an aggressive campaign based upon protests in the streets, that successfully marked her as a hater. On a smaller scale, we were able to do the same thing against hate radio hostess, quote, Dr. Laura Schlesinger and our Stop Dr. Laura campaign a couple decades later. Today we need to do the same thing versus the local and national proponents of these anti-equal rights ballot initiatives. Postscript about Obama. No article about the question #1 debacle would be complete without commenting about the AWOL status of the president. I'll be a fierce advocate for gay rights, Obama said during his campaign. A few days ago, when asked President Obama's position on #1, a spokesman said that the White House, quote, had no position on the initiative. This is actually a step backwards from the convoluted position that candidate Obama had prior to November, when he quietly told gay audiences that he opposed anti-gay initiatives, while at the same time not being in favor of our right to marry. So while the fierce advocate made multiple trips to New Jersey, attempting to give life to a corrupt sitting governor's re-election campaign. He wasn't willing to spend a dime's worth of political capital on the rights of LGBT people. A fierce advocate, my ass. Yeah. Questions and answers from Maine. Is gay marriage a civil rights issue? What do you think? Yeah, Jenna?
I think so, and I think that from hearing that, it doesn't look like we came very far from the 1970s.
No, it does not.
From the Lassiter article, when he talks about how homosexuality was portrayed as an external political threat to the traditional family,
That's
and
right.
that's kind of similar to what they were discussing about it being hurtful to the children.
Save our children.
Yeah. So we didn't come far.
It doesn't seem that way, does it? Same arguments. And in some ways, too, I don't know. I mean, while the right, the opponents of gay marriage seem to be using the same arguments that they have always used. As we've been reading, this stuff comes out of the 1970s when the gay rights movement was really, coming to a head. But I think in some ways, too, these initiatives, time and again, that they put to the people to decide, are just defeated. And if it's not going to pass in Maine, where is it going to pass? Certainly not in Ohio. Probably not in New York either. So it's like, Jenna, in some ways, it's like the debate hasn't moved forward. I mean, on this, you've got the conservatives, the opponents of the gay rights making the same thing. While it seems to me, to a certain extent, the movement itself is trying to, they're not learning from their mistakes, it could be. I don't know. Brendan?
I think in general, statewide referendums on gay rights are just a very poor political tactic for gay rights supporters. It didn't work in California, and there's too much to be left to people's emotions and wills and their passion leading up to that referendum. It's all about media and getting the message out there and scaring people. I think that they should take a different sort of tactic, like lawsuits and stuff like that, and it might take a little bit longer for change to come, but it's going to be a lot longer lasting and more solid support for gay rights in that way.
So what do they need to do?
Like to take an approach like the NAACP, take stuff to the Supreme Court, challenge what they see as unfair religious laws and against gay rights.
Rather than on a state-by-state basis.
Well, I mean, you could challenge it either in the state courts or in the federal courts.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, these popular referendums are just haven't worked for them. I mean, one tactic doesn't work, you move on to the next one.
I think, like the civil rights movement, I think it's important to have federal backing. Like what you were saying, it's not going to be successful if you don't have the policies behind them, like the civil rights movement. I just think if you go on people's emotions, it's just going to keep getting shut down because very much so the American population is against gay rights.